Good afternoon. My name is Lisa Collins, and I'm the administrator of the Schubert Center for Child Studies at Case Western Reserve University. Welcome and thank you for being here. At the Schubert Center, we bridge education, policy, research, and practice for the well-being of children, seeking to identify and address root causes of inequality, particularly inequalities based on identity, race, ethnicity, class, education, and significantly for this afternoon, ability. Our series, Celebrating Identity Beyond Diagnosis, was inspired by and is presented in conjunction with the 2021 Cleveland Humanities Festival, the theme of which is identity. Too often, children with rare diseases and complex diagnoses are marginalized or disregarded. And when the intersecting identities of race and class are factored in, the marginalization increases exponentially. Data from research conducted here at our university and throughout the country has shown that as a result, there is a disproportionate negative impact on the health outcome and the lives of children of color with complex medical conditions. Salina Miller, Patricia Parker, and Charisse Nikki Montgomery are doing critical work to change that. Before we begin, we'd like to recognize our campus co-sponsors and partners, the Baker Nord Center for the Humanities, the Office for Disability Resources, the Office of Interprofessional Education, Research, and Collaborative Practice, and the Research Institute for Children's Health. We're grateful for their support. We're glad to welcome our community partners for the series as well. Achievement Centers for Children, A Special Wish Cleveland, Jewish Education Center of Cleveland's SEGULA, Madvocator, Educational and Healthcare Training, Mother to Mother, Positive Education Program, REACH, Resource Education and Community Help Services, UCB of Greater Cleveland, and the Upside of Downs of Northeast Ohio. Thank you for all the work you do day in and day out supporting the youth in our community. Our series continues with 2 additional events. Tonight, Rick Wadati, an award-winning photographer, will share in images and stories his encounters with children around the world and the initiative Frame, Faces Redefining the Art of Medical Education. Tomorrow at 1 p.m., we'll be hosting a conversation with 4 disability advocates, youth ambassadors who are changing people's perspectives with their honesty, thoughtfulness, and humor. They'll share what inspires them to speak out and how they use their unique voices to foster positive change. Details and registration info for both events are on our website, and there will be a link in the chat shortly. Please feel free to share comments and questions this afternoon in the chat box, and make sure you've selected the option Share with Panelists and Attendees. If there's time at the end, we'll invite questions through the chat or Q&A feature. And now to our panel. Ms. Miller, Ms. Parker, and Ms. Montgomery's book, We Dare Be Brave, African-American Moms and the Emotional Journey of Raising Children with Disabilities, is a collaboration that draws from their more than 60 years of collective experience with disabilities and advocacy. Inspired by those experiences, they share stories to empower, equip, and inspire parents and caregivers of special needs children to be confident in their roles, to learn about and better understand their own emotions, and to meet children's needs by being well, being intentional, and being brave. They'll introduce themselves more fully, so I'll conclude now by saying, with their book's endnote, no matter what emotions or challenges we deal with, our love for our children calls on us to do more and be more, so we can help our children reach their potential. It's our honor to welcome Salina Miller, Patricia Parker, and Charisse Nikki Montgomery. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm going to go on and share my screen and pull up our slides, and we'll be able to share those with you all. All right.
Welcome to Building Trust Through Representation at the intersection of disability, race, and parenting. We are glad you joined us this afternoon, and we are excited to share our experiences as parents, as well as practical ways to engage families equitably and inclusively. We'll begin with our objectives before sharing some information about each of the 3 speakers. By the end of this session, we want you to understand the barriers and unique cultural needs of Black mothers who are raising children with disabilities. And we want you to have specific tools to improve outcomes and engagement among the Black families you serve. Why are we focused on the needs of Black parents? First, it's our own personal experience. Identity is an important part of how we interact in the world, and our cultural foundation informs and affects the outcomes we see and the way people see us. Secondly, our experiences as advocates are dependent upon the understanding and collaboration of the professionals who serve our families.
You're muted, Salina. There you go.
Sorry, guys. Your 3 presenters today are the co-authors of We Dare Be Brave, Moms and the Emotional Journey of Raising Children with Disabilities. The title of this book comes from a line in a poem called Touched by an Angel by Dr. Maya Angelou. In addition to our roles as parents and caregivers, we each lead organizations focused on the needs of parents who have children with disabilities. African-American moms raising children with disabilities often have unequal access to resource and information. We Dare Be Brave reflects on emotional and practical solutions to get the best outcome for our kids. Our journey from fear, loneliness, and pain to becoming successful advocates is intended to help our families overcome barriers. We Dare Be Brave gives a glimpse of those barriers and offers solutions. We wrote this book because we each face complex barriers in healthcare and education, and we wanted to help other moms get past the obstacles. The obstacles that we had experienced. We also wanted to empower mothers with information and practical ways to be more effective advocates. Finally, we wanted to offer other moms hope and inspiration on their journey. The 3 of us live at the intersection of disability, race, and parenting. As we navigate our children's disability, the race is perceived and treated, and the challenges of parenting. Well, my name is Salina Miller, and I have 2 amazing boys, one 20 years old named Eric, and Elijah, who is 16 years old. Elijah was born with congenital glaucoma, and at the age of 18 months, he was diagnosed with developmental delay, along with epilepsy and a host of other complex medical conditions. I describe Elijah to people as my gift from God. Elijah has a spirit and a joy and a love about him that can only come from God. Whenever I am feeling down, upset, defeated, powerless, depressed, all of those emotions, I tend to draw to Elijah. And if I lay beside him or sit beside him, everything just feels all right. There's like something about his spirit that can change my entire day. And that's why I say I truly believe that God blessed me with this wonderful young man. Elijah has had to endure so much in his life since day 1 of birth. He had many surgeries. He had his first surgery when he was 1 year old. He had hospital stays sometime, and I was always there laying right beside him for weeks at a time. He's had many blood transfusions and, again, a host of other medical procedures. And yet he has a strength about him that only as adults we wish we had this type of strength that he has. I know I wish that I had this strength. Elijah is a master when it comes to electronics. If it has anything to do with Apple, a computer, an iPad, an iPhone, he can master it. There's things that he knows about these electronics that it took me months and maybe even years to even figure out how to work it. His attention to detail and his patience is why he's such a master at these things. I wish I just had that type of patience when it comes to stuff. Elijah loves bowling. Bowling is one of his favorite things. He's also, people call him an old soul. I don't know if it's because of me, but I introduced him to old cartoons, Tom and Jerry, things like that. And so he's kind of gravitated to those. And he can even tell you the years and the month that they came out. He loves Dave and Buster's, and he has now mastered the yo-yo. He is a very protective young man. He's a protective uncle, son, and little brother who loves people even when they don't love him back. My entire life has been centered around Elijah's care, so much so that I've created an entire ministry that is dedicated to supporting parents and caregivers to individuals with disabilities called Mother to Mother. I am also a surrogate parent for Warrensville School District, supporting foster children in special education process. I also work for Milestones Autism Resources, and I was a parent representative for Warrensville Middle School. I sat on the Patient Family Partnership Council at Rainbow Babies and Children's Hospital. I've written a number of blogs, participated in conferences, and much more, all because of Elijah.
Hello, my name is Patricia Parker. I am a parent of two amazing adult sons. My oldest son, Matthew, is 30 years old, and he has autism, which includes significant self-interest behaviors and epilepsy. Matthew also has a dual diagnosis of anxiety disorder and obsessive compulsive disorder. Matthew loves being out in the community, and if all possible, he would never be at home. Now, he plans every detail of his day, from his meals to community activities, which includes sporting events, museums, movie theaters, or even a theatrical play. Matthew is never separated from his iPad unless you could introduce him to an activity that is just as exciting and stimulating. Now, Matthew generally leads an active life, participating in his adult day program and enjoys every aspect of community life. Matthew's sensory and behavior challenges since he was a child has always affected his quality of life at home and in the community. Biting his hands and other areas of his body, hitting his head with a closed fist, and more. Finding effective ways to manage his behavior and his sensory needs is a daily part of our lives. The pandemic has altered his daily life dramatically, intensifying his sensory and behavior challenges. Matthew's typical day includes spending significant time in his sensory room, where he has equipment that provides deep pressure, swings for motion to address his anxiety, and bubble machines to promote calmness, and more. We are always working on communication goals to expand his expressive communication, which helps to decrease the number of his self-interest behaviors. Spending time on his iPad is an important part of his routine, and playing his favorite sport, which is basketball, is a must. He loves showing off his talents and skills, making one perfect shot after another, all net and no rim. As Matthew's mom and main caregiver, my life has pretty much revolved around him and his care. Yet, in experiencing the challenges of advocating for Matthew, I developed a passion to help and support other families along their journey. My hope was to make their journey a little easier and for them not to be alone. For that reason, I ventured back to college and obtained my BA in nonprofit administration, and in 2012, founded Resource Education and Community Health Services. This was my way of supporting the community in which I live.
Thanks, Pat. I'm Nikki Montgomery, and I'm the mom of one, Richie. Richie is 9.5 years old, and that half is very important to him right now. And he has a rare genetic condition called RYR1 associated congenital fiber type disproportion myopathy. This condition affects his muscles and every system of his body. When Richie was born, he could only move his eyelids and his fingertips. And over the years, he's had a tracheostomy and ventilator for the first 3 years of his life, and he's always had complicated medical care. A few years ago, autism and ADHD were added to Richie's list of diagnoses as well. Today, Richie is an expert driver of his power wheelchair, going forward, backward, and at very high rates of speed. He is thoughtful and kind. He's inquisitive. He knows everything about race cars and every driver and car number they have. And Richie just loves to learn. He also does not ever forget anything, which is good and bad sometimes. Richie is very friendly and well-loved. A typical day in our lives with Richie is very complicated sometimes. It includes home nurses who help to manage his caregiving, since Richie needs support for all of his daily living activities. It includes tube feeding and medications and therapies and all of his personal care needs. Richie has the support of an educational assistant at school to help with his learning needs as well. And he loves strict routines and timelines, which he likes to hold us accountable to, even when we don't know that they were coming. And he's always up for new adventures, so Richie definitely keeps us on our toes. The most challenging aspect of our lives right now is inconsistent in-home care for Richie, whose complex medical needs require overnight monitoring and care. As you can imagine, the pandemic has made that a little bit more difficult, from concerns about exposure to the virus to just the scarcity of professionals who want to do overnight work to meet his needs in our home. In addition to being Richie's mom, I have a background in education as a former teacher and in educational psychology with research on engaging and communicating with the parents of children with complex medical needs. I've also worked for over a decade in healthcare communications, and Richie's birth actually prompted me to go back to school for a graduate certificate in patient advocacy. I'm the author of the Super Safe Kids book series, which is a series of healthcare safety books aimed at children and their families. And those books help to focus on improving health literacy and family engagement in healthcare. And much of that was inspired by what we'd gone through with Richie. A lot of my work these days also focuses on equitable outcomes, and you'll hear more about that today.
All right, well, we have a couple of questions we'd like you to think about. First, what challenges are you aware of that families raising children with disabilities face? Feel free to either type in the chat. I see that there's an option to raise your hand or unmute yourself. Thank you, Lisa.
Salina, because of the webinar format, the attendees can't unmute themselves and speak. So
Okay.
to please put their answers in the chat.
Okay. Thank you, Lisa.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Danielle. Yes. Pat, Nikki, are you guys able to see the chat, or do you want me, Pat, are you able to see the chat?
Oh, yes, I'm able to see.
Okay.
Yeah, we can read these out loud too, just for people who might not be looking right at them.
So we have lack of understanding about the disability, biases, stigma and discrimination, special education law and rights, lack of support for parents. In early intervention, I know there are some concerns about labels and the stigma of diagnosis, your child's your child's future and inclusion.
And I saw some earlier ones that were low expectations from what they can learn from school, understanding the different systems they have to navigate, and even a lack of, and you talked about lack of understanding. Thank you.
And also, in my observation, parents have to push harder for their children to get the public education they deserve. That's correct. Thank you, guys. The next question we have for you to think about is how racism, and inequities might make these challenges even harder for families of color. We have lack of or differential diagnosis, biases by race. There are a lot of resources for families, but the conduits for informing families isn't always effective. The measures used for diagnosis are white-centered, not having equal access, lack of empathy for children of color can lead harsh school discipline, yes.
Mhm.
The possibility of less services available, so again, access,
Mhm.
access to resources, yes. Institutions are not trained to deal with people with disabilities in general, but are even more underprepared for cultural understanding. Yes. Perception of behavior differences.
Mhm.
Any more? Lack of cultural competence in dealing with children with disabilities in minority cultures. Under-resourced schools and neighborhoods.
Mhm.
Yeah. Assuming parents are not knowledgeable about their own children. Discipline instead of intervention. I love it. Oh, I love these responses.
Yes.
Poor resource allocation. Statistics show that children of color are underrepresented in disability support services.
I think what you'll hear is that a lot of those are common, and we'll talk more about many of those themes you all mentioned as we continue.
Yes. All right, so what all three of us have in common are some of the barriers we have faced in our journeys as parents and advocates.
Yes. All right, oh, one slide too far. Here we go. Okay, so common barriers, and we're going to talk a little bit more about these. And I think you will notice that a lot of the comments are echoed in what we identified as those barriers and what research has shown to be those barriers too. So it's no secret that Black Americans consistently experience the worst outcomes in healthcare and education. In fact, there's not a single domain of public life in which Black Americans have the best outcomes. These disparities and the biases that people of color in general face are well researched and documented. And it's also not news that anti-Black bias is common both in healthcare and education and in society at large. These biases are not without consequence. And I think we really want you to think about that today. Many healthcare and educational professionals are working on identifying their own biases and becoming more culturally competent and culturally responsive. As these professionals build their skills and knowledge in these domains, it's important to realize that families continue to feel the effects of unaddressed bias and the gaps in cultural competence. So I'll repeat that idea in a different way. While you as a professional might be learning to deal with your biases and cultivate cultural competence, the families you serve are still having to navigate and deal with the gaps in your knowledge and the damage that those gaps can create. Racism has been identified as a core determinant of child health. When mothers experience interpersonal racism, it not only affects the mother, but it actually affects the health and the development of the child as well. Families of color often experience gaps in services related to caring for their disabled children. And even when we do find the resources and services we need, we don't see professionals who look like us and identify with our cultural experiences. And also, we don't see people who identify with the perspectives we might have sometimes. Worse yet, we have experiences that actually undermine our trust in the professionals who serve us. Black families and other minority families are dealing with the negative consequences of racism in addition to those other challenges in their lives. And creating equitable outcomes is dependent on addressing those additional needs and stressors that these families face. Equity and inclusion are words we hear a lot these days, And at the heart of equity and inclusion is a defined goal to ensure that families who need a service or resource have access to that service or resource without additional obstacles. Serving families is not a one-size-fits-all, or if you build it, they will automatically come. So throughout this presentation, you will hear us use the word equity, and I want to make sure we're on the same page in terms of what that word means. I personally love this definition of equity from the George Washington University Milken Institute of Public Health, which says equity recognizes that each person has different circumstances and allocates the exact resources and opportunities needed to reach an equal outcome. So here, equity is not about putting in an equal amount of effort or care on the front end. Equity is about the back end, the outcome. As a former English teacher, I like to pay attention to the verbs because they tell us what we should be doing. They're the action words. And when we look at the action words in this definition, it's to recognize and to allocate. So equity requires not only that we examine conditions closely so we can recognize, but also that we shift our efforts to match the needs that we find. What needs to happen so the outcomes are excellent for all the families you serve? What do you need to do to ensure that you're not reinforcing or making worse the disparities that already exist? Those are questions that I hope you will continue to think about. The complexities of our lives are often made more challenging by race, racism, and the inequities that exist as the long-term effects of racism in the systems that serve us. As professionals, the ability to acknowledge, understand, and dismantle these inequities, as well as dismantling individual biases, is really essential to serving families well and meeting those professional and humanistic ethical responsibilities. In this next segment of our presentation, we will discuss some of the moments that challenged us as parents of children with disabilities, along with how race, racism, and inequity made these moments even more challenging. Let's keep this definition of equity in mind as we talk about those challenges faced by families like ours. And we'll start with Salina sharing one of those moments from her own experience, the moment of diagnosis.
Thank you, Nikki. This was my Elijah 8 years ago. Isn't that such a cute picture of him? The process from knowing something was different about my son to actually getting a diagnosis took years. This is not uncommon for Black women who often have to see several specialists and have a much longer delay to diagnosis of autism. Elijah was diagnosed with developmental delay at the age of 18 months. He wasn't walking, talking, or holding his bottle on the same schedule as his older brother. By the age of 5, I knew Elijah had autism. He had repetitive behavior and self-stimulation like flapping his hands and pacing the room. He was also prone to eloping. And again, he was not speaking at all until age 5. I attempted numerous times to obtain an autism diagnosis. And I was told that because Elijah can be social sometimes, that he does not fit the criteria for an autism diagnosis, even though he checked off all the other boxes on the assessment. My knowledge of my child was not taken seriously. I was dismissed and treated as though my voice did not matter. I was frustrated and alone. I didn't know who to turn to professionally. I was still learning how to navigate the school district as well as the medical system and maintaining a regular routine for my children, and I worked a full-time job. We were referred to a new specialist when Elijah was 8 years old. Now, mind you, between this time, Elijah had went through a lot of medical situations. So by the time he was 8, we got to the new specialist who finally heard me. I was so excited. She came out of the assessment room and after 90 minutes and confirmed what I knew all along, and that was Elijah is autistic. We left with a huge packet about this autism diagnosis, but no other concrete path to take. At that point, there was no start here, there were no resources, there were no direction. That left me feeling powerless and uninformed. I also didn't have a way to explain the diagnosis to family and friends. On average, Black children are diagnosed with autism 3 years later than white children, and they often misdiagnose with conditions first, mostly related to behavioral issues. That delay of 3 years means our children often miss early intervention entirely and suffer from lifelong delays that could have been addressed with early diagnosis. Years ago, the concern was that too many Black children were referred to special education services, but we now know the opposite is true. Minority children are being identified less frequently and later in life. This means they often need more interventions and more intensive interventions later, which places additional burdens onto the families. So why is this happening? When I had concerns about my son, I went to his pediatrician and I saw a behavioral specialist. With each, my concerns about his development were dismissed. They told me he was too social for the autism diagnosis. They told me my gut feeling about his development was wrong, even though I knew there was a huge difference from the development of my older child. What I encountered was that doctors were not listening to me or trusting my observation of my own child, and that held up the process for him. The professionals we dealt with treated me as if I was not a creditable source of information, and they ignored and glossed over my concerns. Culturally appropriate autism screenings were still an important issue to tackle as we walk towards equity in the diagnosis process. I didn't know what to do besides keep searching for a professional who would listen to me. There's Elijah now. That picture, well, he's even bigger than that now, but that was probably about a year or two ago. That feeling of not knowing what to do didn't stop there. Once my son was finally diagnosed, no one told me how to proceed. As a parent, I shouldn't need to turn to Google to find out what to do next. This is something else Black women report frequently. There is a term called information poverty, which is what I experienced. I had to find information and continue to seek out specialists who would listen to my concerns. This feeling of isolation and powerlessness also affected my trust in professionals who gave the diagnosis. Why would you leave me to learn on my own? Why wouldn't they help me navigate the complex landscape of disability? They dropped a diagnosis on our laps and left us to struggle alone. Through my own Google searches, I found Help Me Grow and was able to get my son early intervention. This workload I had to take on to find what my son needed made me not trust the professionals who had worked with him. Consciously or unconsciously, they had created barriers for us. By helping families access the connections and support they need, professionals can help build families' trust in them as resources for helpful and reliable information. It is also important that the tools professionals develop are literacy friendly and accessible so families can understand and use the information effectively. Next, Pat will discuss the barriers of inclusion and how her family experienced it.
Now, this is a picture of Matthew. This is taken at school. He's probably maybe about 8 or 9 in this picture. Parenting an individual with disabilities involves frequent doctor visits, evaluations with endless questions, therapies, IEP meetings, ISP meetings, SSI, Medicaid, and so much more. Many families are operating overwhelmed, we're sleep deprived, and sometimes in crisis mode. Parents have to navigate so many systems where technical terms and acronyms are used to accommodate professionals. But for families, this type of communication can be intimidating and make it difficult or even impossible for them to make informed decisions. Families seeking support in navigating these systems have found that such support is not readily available in the Black community. For that reason, I found it necessary to travel outside my community to receive the information and supports I needed to effectively advocate for my son. There is much work to be done in ensuring equitable access to services and resources for Black parents navigating disability. Every professional should be considering how to make accessible their services to every family who might need them. The need to travel outside my community required me to come out of my comfort zone, which hindered my ability to engage in discussions or ask questions that were culturally relevant to me. Also, the lack of available resources and professionals serving communities of color places an additional burdens on these families as they seek resources outside their community. These disadvantages include families who don't have access to transportation, medical insurance, time off, and childcare support. In some instances, I felt the perception from some communities that Black parents were not interested in advocating for their individuals with disabilities because we were rarely in attendance for workshops, seminars, and trainings, which made me feel even more uncomfortable. But I personally know the difficulties in advocating in any system when you're trying not to be homeless or struggling to meet the basic needs of your entire family. Some research shows that healthcare providers and teachers are less engaged when it comes to families of color, and their interactions are more about telling families what to do than listening and collaborating. Changing the tone and content of one-to-one interactions can go far in terms of improving outcomes and engagements of Black families. Dealing with chronic grief, caregiving, and managing a household as a single mother with little to no support, all of this had a direct effect on my mental health. I am among the 20% of mothers of medically complex individuals who suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder and other mental health concerns. I was personally diagnosed with PTSD after witnessing my son code blue after he received an overdose of fentanyl after spinal fusion surgery. I spent so much time and energy caring for my son that I neglected my own mental health needs. After ending up in the emergency room with what I perceived as a heart attack, but was ultimately a panic attack, I was forced to address my mental health and to develop a plan of self-care. I found out that I needed a team of support in developing my plan of self-care. That team of support came from within the community, such as a professional counselor, parent support groups, my primary care physician, the church, family, and friends. I needed a self-care plan that would address the needs of my mind, body, soul, and spirit. I have witnessed many caregivers within the Black community suffer in silence, just like I did. Because professional counseling is not traditionally a support that the Black community embraces. Families need the support of professionals they work with to help them identify and connect to mental health resources within their community and to help destigmatize the use of these resources. In addition to the 20% of moms who have PTSD, another 40% meet part, but not all of the criteria for PTSD, which lets us know how traumatic the parenting experience can be. Now, this is another picture of Matthew. He is an adult here. Another one of the ways I found to cope with trauma and anxiety was empowering myself with knowledge and information. It's important to remember that moms of color deal with greater economic and social stress, which affects their own health and mental health. Families of color are often dealing with many social determinants of health that add to the stressors of parenting. Using tools to screen families for social determinants of health and having open conversations about challenges and needs are among the ways professionals can bridge the inclusion gap for Black families. Recognize that families of color may have experienced many types of trauma, including trauma related to racism. Trauma affects health and outcomes, and trauma-informed approaches can support better outcomes. Studies have shown that reducing parental stress and connecting family to social supports help to improve parental resilience and even improve the health and well-being of the child with disabilities. Next, Nikki will talk about representation and how it can better present a barrier or facilitate better outcomes.
All right, now we get a chance to share a little picture of Richie here. This was Richie when he was about 5 months old, and he's fully equipped with his ventilator and tracheostomy, but he was a teeny tiny little thing, and I still miss those days sometimes. Over the past several years, I've been fortunate to participate in healthcare and education in many ways that go beyond our personal advocacy for Richie's complex needs. In school, I was our district's parent mentor, providing support and information to other families of children with disabilities. I also serve as a surrogate parent and advocate for the educational needs of children in the foster system. In the healthcare setting, I've served on quality and safety committees at 2 children's hospitals, and I've led a patient and family advisory committee and served on a hospital board as a parent representative. I've also served on several statewide and national boards and committees related to healthcare safety and patient experience. In both healthcare and education, I've learned that while organizations might have good intentions on equity and inclusion, they may not actually be ready to be inclusive and equitable. Equity, inclusion, and representation have to go beyond surface level. From the family perspective, families form impressions about how welcome they feel during every interaction. From your brochures and marketing, to the setting the appointment, to how they're treated by reception staff, and how they feel in a clinical interaction. Black families may feel stereotyped, patronized, or disregarded entirely, and they may disengage as a result or seem non-compliant or non-communicative, when in reality they're responding to negative interactions or experiences. Assumptions and stereotypes about families' capacity or the capacity of their disabled child can have a huge impact on trust and engagement. Instead, learning about families' unique challenges and needs can help create opportunities to serve families better and help them develop leadership skills that benefit their own advocacy efforts over the long term. So my statistic is that the work of diversity, equity, inclusion, and representation belongs to everyone, not just those with diversity and inclusion in their title. So each of us has a responsibility, both ethically and socially, to make sure that outcomes are equitable. Our healthcare and education systems clearly have not been known for this historically. They've delivered and are currently delivering vastly different results for Black and other minority children. This cannot continue to be expected or accepted as the way things are. The family stories and journeys that we've shared today are hopefully adding to your understanding of the complex issues that affect Black families. It is up to each professional to continue to build their own understanding so they can serve families more effectively. It's also up to each professional to be sure you're not creating new disparities for your patients, students, clients, or their families, or contributing to the heavy load of negative experiences they may already be having. As we think about solutions and what progress looks like, we need to not only look at interpersonal reactions, but also at the larger systems that serve families. The U.S. Department of Education, the American Medical Association, and the American Academy of Pediatrics are all among the organizations that have acknowledged the need for greater workforce diversity as a tool in improving equity and hopefully reducing the negative interactions that occur because of poor cultural competence. Increasing families' confidence and positive interactions can also help build trust and keep families engaged. In short, we should assume that all families are capable of excellence in engagement and parenting, And we should keep each family or help each family identify how they can achieve that excellence. There's an obvious continued need to identify biases and increase cultural competence. This is not just about personal development as professionals. The ability to identify and disarm biases and interact in culturally competent ways actually increases the safety, health, and well-being of children and families. It improves their trust in the systems that have so far never delivered equitable outcomes for them. Measuring the experiences and satisfaction of families and looking at the data based on race and ethnicity can help organizations and leaders understand how to better meet the needs of diverse populations. If we're afraid to ask the tough questions, we will never get the answers we need to do better for all families. After all, we can really only be focused on improving equity if we are measuring equity, and we can only be focused on building trust if we are measuring it and taking actual steps toward improvement.
We want you to leave with these ideas, with these main ideas. Families want and need inclusion and acceptance. Families also need ways to get around the barriers in their paths and find support. As professionals, it's important to be a bridge over those barriers and not add to them. Families are learning to be the best advocates they can, and you can help them on that path by connecting them with services, support, and culturally relevant resources. Creating a strategy and measuring the outcomes is the only way to be sure the solutions you develop are effective and equitable. Okay, at this time, we welcome any questions or discussion.
And please feel free to add your questions into the chat or to use the Q&A function. The first question has come in from an attendee who's asking where people can buy your book.
It is available on Amazon, We Dare Be Brave, and it's available as an ebook or as a paperback book.
And we had a second question come in earlier today asking what your next steps are. What's next for each of you in terms of your professional work?
Well, I would say for me, I'm always advocating that the church would be a resource for individuals with disabilities and families. So I'm looking at assisting churches in becoming more inclusive for our families and developing inclusive ministries.
I definitely have to second that, as I'm working with Patricia on that plan. So we have been sought out by a few churches who are looking, again, to be a resource. With us being faith-based women, we also would like to have our children at church services and things like that. So that is one of our next plan. And I think we are working on another book. Nikki, did you want to speak to that?
Sure, we are working on another book. So hopefully by the end of this calendar year, we'll have more resources for families. And in terms of my own professional goals, it's to continue to create curricula and resources to help families build their skill in navigating these complex systems. So the three of us will be working together in multiple combinations to bring more programming and resources to families.
Dr. Montgomery asked, change in thinking about race and disability is a long-term project. What resources are available to help professionals with ongoing training?
I think starting with the implicit bias stuff and the cultural competence training that they get at their institutions often is a good first step, but we have to realize that that's not the only step. that once you identify your biases, you need to dig deeper and find out how those biases are influencing your practice and how those practices are influencing the people you serve. So we have to be willing to dig a lot deeper. There is much more to learn, and there's much more to do to dismantle these systems that have been set up perpetually inequitably.
Nikki, that answer ties into another question from the Q&A. An attendee asks, how can a white professional reduce tension and bias by moms who have experienced trauma?
I think, Pat, you talked a little bit about trauma-informed practices, right?
Yeah, I think the thing is, making sure whatever conversations that you're having with families, take the time to slow down and give families a chance to actually grasp all the information that you're sharing and making sure that it's not too technical and that it's family friendly. It takes parents to process. I mean, we're going through a lot of different challenges, even when you're sharing information, and give us a chance to ask questions and have patience with us. I remember one time I was sitting in a meeting and I had quite a lot of information being given to me at one time. And I remember a professional saying to me, to verbally repeat back the information that she was giving to me at that time. And as an African-American, I felt very, very, I felt very embarrassed because at the room, I was the only person of color there. And I felt that she was actually challenging my ability to comprehend information. So I think it's important just to be very, very sensitive to parents who may be going through so many challenges and just are not able to hear everything that you're saying at one time, and give them a chance to process it. And if they need to repeat something over and over, be willing to do that.
And to add to that, I think even realizing that the experiences are different for families of color is a start to be conscious of whether it's different when it comes from you, to be conscious of your own behaviors and bias as a start, but then to recognize that families are coming in with that baggage. And we can't let it go when we walk into the room and we're waiting to see if you are part of our past experience that wasn't great or part of a better experience going forward. So a statement of that partnership, asking about what those previous experiences might have been. This is a conversation and a relationship that we have to build, and making it that means that you will hopefully build that trust over time.
A lot of us parents, we come in with, like Nikki said, the baggage, but also fear. So remember to talk to us, not at us. And we are here to collaborate and build partnerships. I know the three of us teach parents the importance of partnership, and that's what we're here to do, is to partner with teachers and professionals, because we all want the same and a better outcome for our children.
Salina, that actually ties into two connected questions from the chat. The first was Gabriella Celeste, who is our policy director at the Schubert Center, asking where we can find information to share with parents here in Cleveland for regular support meetings. And Patricia Otter also asked if you're open to providers referring parents to you, who parents they see experiencing some of the same challenges.
I could definitely say yes, that happens all the time. I get a lot of referrals from a lot of different people. I'm always open to provide support wherever I can. Most definitely, yes.
Absolutely, I second that. A lot of the information you can find, of course, social media. I know as far as mother to mother, you can Google us and you'll find us. We are all over social media. We are through UH, you can find us there. So a lot of like Milestones Autism resources and CFK, those are other ways that you can find information on support groups. We are connected through all of those organizations. So I hope that helps.
I know we won't have time to get through all the questions, but you've all three spoken so lovingly and beautifully about your sons. So I'm thinking maybe a good final question is from Amy Fisher, our postdoc here at the Schubert Center, who asks how you maneuver conversations about disability and race with your children. And I would add to that, how do you guide parents who are struggling with the same issue?
You know, my son is, I said he was very inquisitive. We listen to a lot of conversations. He likes to listen to Martin Luther King speeches, and we talk about injustice and break down those speeches for him. So these are conversations that are happening in most of our homes in different ways. We have to tailor those conversations to our child's understanding. But my goal ultimately is to have my son be an excellent advocate for himself, to speak up for himself, and to learn to do what took us as parents some time and adjusting to do. So I think bridging that gap is making sure he knows he has a voice, so that when he enters a setting with professionals, he walks in with that confidence, well, rolls in with that confidence, and knows that he has a space there and has, you know, he's able to express his needs. So to me, it actually starts with the next generation of education.
And for me, I would say, you know, when I'm encouraging parents as far as advocating for themselves, I always say to them, it's not about having all the answers. I mean, you know, sometimes that's intimidating. You're walking to a situation and you need information. I always say it's about asking the questions and knowing the questions to ask for your individual with disabilities, and not walking away from that situation until you get your questions answered to be able to make an informed decision. And if you're not getting your questions answered, put everything on hold and then reach out to other individuals that will help you get those questions answered.
Salina, do you want to add anything to that answer as well?
No. I know we're here for time, so no. Pat and I are partners. Nikki, we're partners. We say the same thing. I'm not going to repeat anything that they just said.
Okay. So I can close up. Do you have any final thoughts before we close the session from any of the three of you?
For any parents that are logged on today, community is extremely important. If you're not, this journey, as you know, is a lonely journey, or can be a lonely journey. So finding organizations, groups that you can connect with that can help you with resources and information has been a godsend to me. And even being a founder of an organization, I found out it was more for my benefit than me giving information to other families. So community has been, I think the ladies can agree, has been something that's extremely helpful for us.
Yes.
Okay, well, on behalf of the Schubert Center, on behalf of our campus partners and our community partners and everyone who's attending here today, I want to thank the three of you for sharing your stories and the stories of your sons. We're deeply grateful for the tremendous work that you're doing. The passion and dedication that you have is clear, and you know, inspired really by the experiences with your individual children who set you off on this path. That path has taken you, you know, on a journey where you're creating positive change for children across the community and beyond. You're helping the systems here to recognize, to understand, you know, the importance of recognizing and allocating the resources and opportunities needed for families, and to help, ultimately to help all of us reach better outcomes for your children and for children like yours. I want to thank everyone again for joining us. We will be sending out a follow-up email with a recording of the session with links to Patricia, Nikki, and Salina's organizations, as well as some of the other resources that they mentioned. And of course, with a link to their book on Amazon as well. So we wish you the best of luck. Thank you again. And to those attending, we hope that we'll see you again tonight or tomorrow afternoon for our remaining two events. Thank you and take care. Good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.